2018, a manga artist named Dei Akutami published a series called Jujutsu Kaisen. A few years later, that series went on to win Anime of the Year in 2024. But in that same year, Jujutsu Kaisen was erupting in flames. Because despite winning 2024's Best Animated Series, about the duration of Season 2's release, it was bombarded by a series of criticism for its animation. The toxicity that came through this could really be boiled down to an apology made by a key animator. Until then, I would have lived my life as the worst animator who has ruined a masterpiece. This self-dehumanization is scary, but it's not just something in 2025. See, there's a hidden horror behind our television screens that's been plaguing the Japanese animation industry since before World War II. Today, through animation, we're able to see a glimpse of the harsh working conditions in East Asia. And I hope we can examine those evils today in a way that many of you might know. The biblical 7 deadly sins. The story summarizing Japanese animation can really start with the sin of lust, or the sin of intense longing. Because after Osamu Tezuka, the father of manga, adopted a weekly animation schedule for his anime Astro Boy, creating an episode every 7 days because he longed to beat out America's Disney, that precedent became culture. Except there's only one difference, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to see if you can point it out. You see, this is what Astro Boy looks like. And this is somewhat modern animation looks like. There's clearly a difference, and rather two completely different worlds, but still completed in the same time frame. The industry didn't care despite the pleas of workers, because they longed for Disney's spot. They longed for the fame, the prestige, and the glory they would get. They were willing to do whatever it took to get there, even creating competition amongst themselves. And that competition breeds envy. Because the fact of the matter is, the animation industry suffers through its over-reliance on cheap outsourcing. Studios, like Toei Animations, will utilize hundreds of overseas workers for their projects. But because they're so spread out across the globe, and because they're so easy to replace, it becomes extremely difficult for any efforts to unionize or collective bargaining for more rights. But despite that, these animators and workers are still held to a degree of excellence, because they're pressured by the sin, wrath, or anger, hatred, disgust. And a prime example of that can be found through cabbages. Because after an animation studio made the fatal mistake of poorly drawing a cabbage in one of their episodes, they were bombarded with an onslaught of criticism, hate, and disgust on the internet. So much so that it sparked a cultural revolution, because from that point in time, it became almost law, anime, food, in it, be treated with respect. We can see the implications of this today, where in a series called Today's Menu for the Amiya Family, every single grain in this fried rice cooking scene is animated individually. That's the work, the time, and the dedication that is expected out of this field. Because in this field, mistakes are nearly unforgivable, even if it costs life. Certainly, the animation industry embellishes these cultures. It embodies the sin of greed and blood. Because whether it be through long working hours, low wages, they're willing to do whatever it takes to make a profit. And we can understand how detrimental this can be for the average worker. In 2023, Wong and other researchers used a population-based cohort study in order to examine the relationship between working hours and mortality rates. And what they found shouldn't surprise you, ladies and gentlemen. Long working hours carries a significant increased risk of all causes of mortality. Coupled with the fact that in most East Asian companies, there are factors like poverty, lack of labor laws, with companies incorporating tactics like locking their doors, verbally abusing their workers to refuse overtime, and even employing dismissal threat strategies, we can understand that the culture these companies carry traps the workers in a vice, in a cage that keeps them working until they can't. The fact of the matter is, the animation industry has certainly profited off of this greed Because as of 2023, the Japanese animation industry is worth $30 billion. So why an industry so successful, the average entry-level animator only working $500 a month? Well, that's where we play a part into this, ladies and gentlemen. Because we fall into the sin of sloth, or apathy. You see, what we choose to do, or rather what we choose not to do, directly impacts the people working in these countries. Take animation, for example. We choose to pirate our shows rather than streaming them legally. Take iAnime, for example, which is the world's largest streaming platform for anime, or rather piracy. And in October of 2023 alone, it carried 364 million visits. To put that in perspective, that is 20 more million visits than Disney Plus, one of the largest global entertainment industries in the world. But it doesn't just stop with animation. The fact of the matter is we exploit sweatshop workers in countries in East Asia, buying their goods and products without considering the implications of the workers themselves. In fact, our consumerism for cheap and trendy goods and entertainment ultimately is what creates this cycle of pain for these workers. Our privilege to indulge ultimately kills our need for reform. And a lack of reform has disastrous consequences, because we see it almost every single year. An animator for A1 Pictures was found dead in his apartment in 2010. Hospitals reported his death as suicide from overwork. Records indicated he was working 600 hours a month. And in his internet journal, he wrote, "I took 3 days off in 10 months." This is just one story out of 10. But despite the toxicity of this culture, it isn't looked down upon in most scenarios. In fact, in Japan, there's a term called inemuri, which means sleeping at work. And rather seen as a sign of exhaustion or poor working conditions, it's considered a badge of honor. Because in this type of culture, in the working conditions that surround it, working is something you're supposed to do, something you feel pride in, something that should be carried like a badge of honor, even when in fact kills you. And I know how difficult it can be to imagine that these problems don't exist because they're so far away from us. I know that I've been in some of the same positions where I'm just scrolling on my phone, binging the day away, and treating everything as if it's so far away from me. But these issues, while we aren't facing them directly, are still something we should consider. Because whether we like it or not, living in the United States has gotten more difficult as time has gone on. The cost of living has gone up. Housing has gone up. The cost of education and tuition has certainly gone up. I'm fully aware of it. The fact of the matter is our wages aren't increasing alongside it. And though we're not in the same position as these workers in East Asia, it is imperative that we consider what the problem is and how we can prevent it and help it before it reaches our front door. See, in a culture that often revolves around the creations made, we cannot forget to appreciate the actual creators. Because they're what keeps our world and our stories